Hello and happy Tuesday, March 9th, and welcome back to our reading in First Samuel for now. Today, chapters 23 and 24 on this day 12. Brief recap from the previous reading. Ahimelech, the priest, he was in a mess all the way around. David had come to him asking for bread, and he gave him the sacred bread, and he was afraid of David. But as it turns out, he should have been afraid of Saul, who came in all of his paranoia and um, accused the priest of conspiracy against him. Saul murdered 85 priests and their families, and even their livestock there. It's very interesting, in fact, when you consider that the livestock was not even spared and used. It's very indicative of the anger that Saul is experiencing. In our culture, we might not see it as being terribly noteworthy of the livestock. However, to these people, um, who lived at what we call subsistence. These people who were doing everything they could to survive from one day to the next, one week to the next. The livestock was quite valuable to them, and you would think that even in the case such as what we read in the 22nd chapter, that these livestock would still be kept to be used for other people's benefits, but that's part of the nuances that the first tellers of this story would have understood. Saul's anger is so furious that he's not even going to take any spoils from this. Okay, so now we move into chapter number 23, and as we noted in the previous reading, there's the contrary figures of Saul and David. They stand in antithesis of one another. By now, we know David's the good guy, Saul is the bad guy. All right, so there's this community of Keilah, and the Philistines, the arch nemesis, the ones that always give you trouble, especially here in First Samuel. They are fighting in this community. They're looting the threshing floors, as it says. You'll remember the threshing floors, the place where the harvest was brought and the harvest was temporarily stored. You had to secure these threshing floors. Why? Because in these cultures of subsistence, one would steal food. It was perhaps seen as necessary for survival. Wars would break out over this, and here is a conflict breaking out over the threshing floor. The Philistines are coming and taking these people's food. This is not excess food in the sense of, well, now our leftovers are gone. This is what they are preparing to survive on until the next harvest to come, perhaps a year later. This is very detrimental. And so don't you want the king and his men to come to your defense if you're this community? Well, we don't know where Saul is, but we do know where David is. He's the one that he prays about it, and he rises to come and defend these people, and he's able to run the Philistines out of there. And in verse 5, he's even to take away the cattle and thoroughly defeat them. There wasn't a lot of cattle in ancient or modern Israel. The reason why it mentions cattle is because there would be very few of these in a community. You would have sheep and goats and other creatures over the course of a year. But the cattle were something that were so rare, they were saved for the most special of occasions. And so by saying David was even to take away their cattle, I mean, this is a big deal. David is a hero. He's doing what Saul should be doing. Saul should be protecting and defending the people, but no. Remember, Saul's the bad guy. David's the good guy. David's the winner. In fact, undoubtedly he is winning over the affection of these people. So what is Saul worried about then? Well, he continues to worry about eliminating David. He's going to try to catch David here at this community that David had just protected, and Saul is going to attempt and fail. Once again, David is the success. Saul is the failure. He's chasing his proverbial well. It's story of Captain Ahab, and failing. And what really demonstrates the failure of all of this within the cultural eyes of the Old Testament is when Jonathan comes to Saul. Saul's son, comes to David and affirms that, once again, that David is the good guy in all of this, and that his father is not going to find him, in verse 17, and that David is going to be the one to rule over Israel, and that Jonathan is going to be the second command, and he affirms that even his father Saul realizes this. So once again, the son who culturally, Jonathan, should be loyal to his father, is loyal to his friend. Shameful speech regarding his father. Again, in that culture, it's shameful. And as readers, we're seeing he's on the right side of all of this. But this is to further differentiate how good David is, how bad Saul is. All right, so David, he's going to escape Saul. Saul finally has to worry about the Philistines at the end of this 23rd chapter and take up for his people what he should have been doing in the first place. But instead, he's got his own agenda. And when politicians, whatever their ideology is, when they have their own agenda, their self-agenda, the people suffer. And that leads us into chapter 24. David's got 3,000 men trying to find David. And David's just got 600 men. In fact, Saul is going to get very close to David now. His men are having to hunker down in caves. Saul's army is right on top of David and David's men. In fact, don't you know, Saul, he's going to have to relieve himself. And so he steps into a cave for a little bit of privacy. And David is right there, hiding by Saul. So much so that David has the opportunity to take out Saul right there. And instead, what do you expect of the virtuous David by now? No, he's not going to bring harm to Saul. He's going to cut off a piece of Saul's robe, and Saul's not even aware of what's happening when he's urinating and David's cutting his robe. This is how oblivious Saul is. This is how much he is fueled by anger. These are things that I'm not reading into the text. These are what's left inferred between the words that the first audience would have been hearing and understanding. David is restrained. He's not going to hurt Saul, but what continues to be the case, Saul, the antithesis of David, he is unrestrained. He's impulsive. So David's going to run out of this cave and say, "Hey, Saul, look here. I had a chance to take you out. I cut off your robe. What do you think of this? What are you going to do about it?" And we have just a glimpse of some tenderness and some concept of shame from Saul. He's going to weep and acknowledge that David's a better man than him, that the kingdom's going to be better off in his hands, and acknowledges David is going to be king. Jonathan has recognized it, and now Saul has recognized the inevitability of this. Saul just asked for one thing, that he and his people, his family, don't get hurt. And so, wow, Jonathan's acknowledged this reality. Now Saul has, and so that's um, we're left at this point. Many of us know the story, but even so, we're left now. What is going to happen? Can Saul and David somehow coexist now that Saul has a tender heart? All right, with that, I'll catch you again at the next reading.